All right, let's look at fauvism. So with fauvism, the colors are just way more saturated. I mean, I don't even know if they reflect, like, these colors reflect real life colors. Maybe this is sunset and like the sky is red, and you start to see a little bit of I don't know, green in the buildings from the way light is shining on the buildings. I don't know. Either way, there's a lot of artistic liberty going on here, right? There's a lot of exaggeration with the colors and the way light works, and these brushstrokes. I mean, same brushstrokes, same ripples in the water, but a lot more. The colors are a little bit more like rough. It's more saturated, right? A lot of yellow here, and it's all of a sudden just switches to blue. There's a lot of abstraction going on here with the way water reacts with light, with sunlight, right? And this, I'm guessing this is the ground. It's not even like brown, or there's no grass on it. It's just red. I don't know why it's red. So this genre, or this movement, is called fauvism. Okay, faux, or fauve, meaning beast. I think it's French. And so this movement is known for being beastly, very wild, and that's where it gets its name. It's a very wild artistic movement that happened in France. Same here. I think this is a piece by Henri Matisse. We'll be looking at a Matisse piece later on. Maybe you recognize this this ring of people frolicking naked, but all the colors are very, very saturated, and they don't really reflect colors you would see in real life. I don't think trees are orange. I mean, maybe this was painted during the fall, but then we have green trees here too, so it's very abstracted. Okay, cubism. Now we sort of move on to more than partial abstraction. You can still see the people here. You can still see the women. So it's not fully abstract. We're getting there. So the way Picasso, this is a piece by Picasso, and the way Picasso drew people or objects is he would look at his subjects from one angle, and then he would imagine what's on the other side of the subject that he can't see from his viewpoint, and he would peel it, he would open it up in his head, and when you open up a 3D object, it turns into like an orange peel, right? So they end up looking like cubes, or like hexagons, one of the polygons. And so we start to see that here. The way he paints people is heavily abstracted, but it's still representational of things that exist in real life. So it's not full abstraction yet. Same with this piece here. I don't know who did this, but quite a bit of abstraction, especially with the colors too. Very abstracted. Okay, so this is Futurism. Futurism came right after Cubism, and Futurism portrays speed and movement. So if you look at this sculpture here, this is a pretty big sculpture. Like, it's a life-sized, like a life-size person would be like this big. It's really big. So this sculpture, it looks like a person walking, right? It looks like him taking a stride, and his leg is out front. But you see these sharp edges. Okay, so that's kind of like portrayal of movement. So, for example, to compare to something that's contemporary, you know, when you play video games, you get motion blur. That's a technique that's been in use since, like, I would say around like 2008, I think. video games use a lot of motion blur these days to portray speed. Well, in Futurism, the way they portrayed speed and movement is by making these edges on moving things like as if there's wind drag. Okay, so this person may be moving quickly, and the artist made this sculpture. It's actually made of wax, and then it was casted with, I think, bronze. But when it was first sculpted, the artist had in mind this person's movement and the speed in which this person was walking. So if you look at this piece too, I think this is a simple landscape, but you see all these like light, what do you call these? Like light rods, I guess, coming out everywhere. I'm sure that portrays the speed in which metropolitan cities move. This kind of looks like a bridge. It's a bridge, and this is like a tower at a bridge, and like you're like a driver, and you're driving through this bridge, and so you see these rods of light and these straight lines to they portray movement and dynamism. And futurism was developed right around the time when film started to get big. So photography has always existed since like the realism period, but it wasn't until around this time when motion picture, also known as cinema or film, got big. And so artists, they took a lot of interests in movement and animation. Okay, animation meaning not like anime, but animation as in moving things, moving living objects, and they try to portray the animation of, for example, horses or running people or bicycles, but on a static surface, on a static image. So that's what futurism is. Okay, and then leading up to postmodernism. Okay, so here we see an example of land art, and this artist actually moved, I mean, not himself, but he hired contractors to move Earth into this spiral. And so this piece is called the Spiral Jetty. Okay, and you can actually go to this place and you can walk to the center. It's a public art installation, and it's land art, or also called earthworks. Okay, so here's an example of an earthwork. It's pretty big, as you can see from the size of these shrubs. There, I would say like one person is maybe like this big, and you can actually walk all the way to the center. Okay, so starting with postmodernism, we start getting these like wild experiments, these wild, crazy objects that most people won't even consider to be art, but that's the artist's intention, and the people making these are artists. So they are art. It's just completely different from what we're used to. And that's the beauty of postmodernism. We start, like, these artists start challenging what the norm is. And you're going to see more and more of this in contemporary times. Okay, so here are some abstract pieces. Here's an abstract sculpture. I think this is David Smith. And this is a stainless steel sculpture. I think this is in Los Angeles. I'm not sure. This is a piece by Barnett Newman. Barnett Newman was one of the more famous artists from abstract expressionism. And he made these color field drawings with simple lines going through, and they portray emotions, or I mean, to some people they're just geometry, but they're big paintings, and they're not small. They're not small. They take up the whole wall. And so artists are becoming more and more interested on the psychology behind specific colors and specific lines and shapes. And so you start seeing these experimentations of color fields. All right, so here's a piece by Louise Bourgeois. Okay, here's a gigantic spider. Look how big it is. Like you have to look up. This is, I don't know, maybe 20 feet, right? 20 feet tall. But Louise Bourgeois is one of the more notable female artists from the abstract expressionist period movement. And she made these objects that loomed over people. It incites fear and anxiety, and I'm sure there's a lot of psychological and maybe some philosophical reasoning behind it. So I wouldn't say this is like full abstraction, unless she's not intending to reference a spider. Maybe she doesn't even know what a spider looks like. Maybe this is an emotion that she's trying to portray with shapes and form, right? When we see it, we think it's a spider because we're used to knowing what a spider looks like. But to a person who's never seen a spider before, how do they even know, right? So these abstract pieces of works, they are heavily dependent on our own perception and our own knowledge. And so everyone perceives them differently. And so your interpretation is important. And along with that, the artist's statement is also important. The artist's intention. Here's a piece that is made with old salvaged car body parts. Okay, so I forgot the name of the artist, but this artist takes a bunch of cars from junkyards and takes them apart and then makes new forms out of these old deteriorating vehicles. Okay, let's talk about process art. So process art started in the US and Europe in the mid-1960s, so it's fairly modern. The end product is not the principal focus. The process of making it is. Okay, so when you look at process art, it's the material that's making the art. The artist just sets it in motion. So it's a series of actions that are used as sort of a script that determines the final outcome of a piece of art. And there are one or more variables that can be changed that can affect the outcome. And sometimes it may not even involve a person, but rather a machine or mechanical devices. And the roots are in performance art and data. And Jackson Pollock's drip paintings had a huge effect on the development of process art, because Jackson Pollock was an action painter in which he dripped paint onto his surfaces. We'll take a look at what he did. But performance art was a big part, because if you think about it, process art is a form of performance art. It's just with performance art, you document it through video or sounds, or maybe there's a tangible piece of artwork that comes out of it, but only sometimes, right? But with process art, you actually get a product out of it. It's just that the process of making it is more important than the actual outcome. All right, and then serendipity is a major factor. A serendipity is an unplanned major discovery that can lead to new ideas, products, and methods. Okay, so that means that experimentation and luck and chance and repetition, they're all very big parts of process art. Okay, so this is Jackson Pollock. He was an action painter, and he was a controversial person. Not even like the art world, the art industry, kind of accepted him as an artist, because this guy, well, he had more emphasis in the way his body moved than what he actually made. Okay, so this is an example of process in which he is employing the action of basically his gestures, and this is merely a documentation of his gestures. So this is an example of a modernist piece, and this sort of goes beyond abstraction, and now it's not even abstract, it's just fully a record of his movements. All right, so this is a piece by Linda Benglis. So if you look at her pieces, you can kind of guess what she did. I think she built something, she made a form, and then she poured molten metal over it. And then she got rid of the object underneath it, and she's left with this shape that molded around the original object underneath the molten metal. And so you get these forms that look like they're like dripping over something, but we don't exactly know what it is, right? So this is a very perfect example of process art in which she has a very specific formula going on, and she repeats that formula to create these experimentations of these experimental sculptures. She doesn't even know what it's going to look like. She just pours molten metal on top of an object that she made prior, right? So in this case, what's the real artwork? Is it the form? Is it the final form that comes out? Or is it the piece that was existing under this form before she removed it? So that's something that you'll have to decide. But these forms, if you look at it, I mean, clearly there was something underneath it that made this shape, right? This is kind of like what happens when like a volcano explodes on the Big Island, and like lava is flowing, and then the lava flows over existing rocks, and then you get this like form over those rocks. But then someone removes those rocks, and so you're left with just this object. So what's the real artwork here? Is it this, or is it the piece that was underneath that she removed? So that's up to you to decide. So there's a lot of interpretation, viewer interpretation as well, and this is a prime example of how process can also affect the outcome and the final product, and also your perception of the piece itself. Okay, so that's all for this week. Next week we'll be talking about modernism and postmodernism, and that'll be the last lecture. So again, review, study, and make sure you yeah, make sure you review, know these artist names, and familiarize yourself with the art that we just saw. Okay, I'll see you next week.